I want to thank each and every one of you for being here with me today. It warms my heart to see so many faces, so many souls gathered in one place, all hungry for something greater than themselves. Now I'm going to start by asking a question that may stir something inside you. Have you ever found yourself in a room full of people, yet you felt absolutely alone? That moment where laughter erupts around you, conversations buzz in your ears, yet deep down you feel disconnected, maybe even misunderstood. I recall a time early in my life when I was still trying to find my footing in this world, standing in the middle of a crowded street in New York City. People were rushing past me, horns blaring, neon signs flashing, and I remember thinking, I've never been surrounded by so many folks and felt so lonely. It wasn't about the noise or the hustle. It was a personal sense of isolation that weighed on my spirit. I didn't understand it then, but I believe now that God calls us to stand alone for a season so He can prepare us for something greater. A blessing so tailor-made, it requires solitude to fully receive it. I know that might sound unusual. Why would God want us alone? Wouldn't it be more fitting that He surrounds us with friends, family, a supportive community? That's exactly the point that used to puzzle me. I thought that all the cheering and companionship would make the journey lighter, but it turned out that some of the deepest work God does in our hearts happens in the quiet moments, away from the crowd, when we can hear nothing but that still, small voice inside. It's in those hushed intervals that clarity emerges, direction is revealed, and we discover that sometimes before we can be poured into, we have to be emptied out. Perhaps this idea resonates with you. Maybe right now you're experiencing a transition in your relationships. Friends drifting away, family not quite understanding your vision, or colleagues who once seemed so tight-knit now seeming distant. And it hurts, it's confusing. You might wonder if you've done something wrong. You might question whether your faith is wavering or if you're simply unworthy of the blessings you seek. Let me assure you, you are worthy, you are beloved. There's nothing flawed about needing to be alone for a time. In fact, it might be exactly what God is orchestrating for your greater good. When you stand in solitude, it doesn't always feel liberating. Often it feels like you've been abandoned, like you've been left behind in a race. Everyone else seems to be winning. But let me tell you from the bottom of my heart, that loneliness you're feeling might just be your spirit being refined, your vision being sharpened, and your heart being aligned with God's plan. I remember a crucial turning point in my own life where it seemed every door I knocked on was shut, every phone call I made went unanswered, and every audition I walked into felt like an echo chamber. My voice was bouncing back to me, but no one was truly listening. Those nights back then were long, and my prayers were filled with tears. I'd ask God, why did it have to be so quiet? Why did it feel like no one else could understand what was brewing in my soul? But in that silence, in that stretch of isolation, I found clarity. I learned to listen more than I spoke. I found my resolve strengthening, my faith deepening, and a sense of purpose that rang louder than any applause could. Looking back, I'm convinced those lonely nights were necessary. They shaped my character far more than the applause ever could. So I'm standing here looking into your eyes because I know there are many of you who can relate. You may be in your 20s trying to figure out who you are apart from what your friends say you should be. You may be a parent who feels overwhelmed because the family dynamic has shifted and it feels like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. You may be in the midst of building a business, working relentlessly, and wondering if anyone truly comprehends how exhausting it can be when the responsibility of an entire team rests on your decisions. And then there are those who, no matter their walk of life, feel stuck in a spiritual limbo, knowing there's more, craving it deep down, yet not quite sure how to get there. To all of you, I say this. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, even in those moments of crushing loneliness, because God is moving in ways you might not see just yet. We gather today to talk about the significance of solitude in our journey of faith, purpose, and blessing. It might not be the most glamorous subject. We'd much rather skip straight to the part where we find our answers, feel fulfilled, and celebrate the victory. But there's a divine process that often takes place in hidden corners. Just like a seed that germinates in dark soil before it ever sees the sun, sometimes our greatest growth happens in the unseen, uncelebrated moments of being set apart. That's the central question before us. Are we willing to accept this necessary season of standing alone, or do we cling to the comforts of company, missing out on what God intends to do in the stillness? I want you to latch on to this truth. God may be calling you to a place of solitude because the blessing He has for you can't be contained in the environment you were in. Maybe your circle wasn't ready to embrace the change you needed. Maybe you needed to shed some unhealthy habits that only silence would expose. Or maybe it's simply time for you to step into a level of authenticity you've never allowed yourself to explore. In my experience, solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's not God pushing you away, it's Him drawing you closer. So, if you feel alone right now, if you're in a season that seems barren and silent, take a deep breath and remember, God is calling, and with that call comes an invitation to walk a path that might challenge you, but will ultimately lead you to a blessing you could never have imagined. So let's explore that path together tonight. I want us to delve into the reasons behind this divine solitude, to look at the ways in which we can use these seemingly empty moments to fuel our faith, and to learn how we can open our hearts to receive a blessing that's far bigger than anything we've dreamed up on our own. I believe that by the end of our time together, you'll walk away with a renewed perspective and a renewed courage to face those quiet seasons head on. Because the challenge isn't about whether you'll face solitude. It's about what you do with it when it comes and how you allow it to shape your destiny. Now, as we move forward, I want to invite you to tune in, open your mind, and most importantly, open your heart. Let the words you hear tonight resonate deep within you. They're not just for your mind, they're for your spirit. They're for that place in your soul that sometimes trembles with fear, sometimes aches with doubt, but always yearns for truth. Embrace this moment with me, and let's see if we can't discover why being alone might just be the most powerful part of your journey toward God's blessing. Listen, I've seen it in my own life and in the lives of many people I respect. The stillness is a sacred chamber, a workshop of sorts, where your character is molded, your resilience is tested, and your faith is refined. This is where you start to realize that every tear, every sleepless night, every heartbreak can become a stepping stone toward the life you were meant to live. And when God finally calls your name, when He opens that next door, you step through it, not as the person you were, but as the person you've been carefully, purposefully shaped to be. That, my friends, is why God calls you to be alone before He blesses you. And that's the journey we're about to unfold, step by step. I want you to hold on to your seat, open your heart, and dare to believe that what may look like loneliness could be the beginning of a transformation so profound, you'll look back in awe one day. I'm here to share how I've walked that road, how I've fallen, stumbled, and gotten back up, all with God's grace guiding me. So let's walk this path together. Let's see what God might be preparing for you even in the silent. Let me tell you something that might challenge you. Sometimes we are so afraid of being alone that we never discover who we really are. Tonight, I want to invite you to break that fear, stand strong in your solitude, and realize that it's not loneliness you're stepping into, it's the presence of God Himself. That's how your best blessings begin. And trust me, from here on out, we're going to unravel exactly why that is, and we're going to do it with honesty, with courage, and with a heart wide open to the possibilities. All right, let's dive deeper. I can feel your spirits leaning in, and that's exactly where we want to be. because where you are now is the threshold of understanding. And once you cross that threshold, you'll never see your season of solitude in the same way again. Let's keep going, let's keep growing, and let's keep believing that God has something extraordinary in store for us when we learn to stand alone before the blessing. I want to start by affirming something that may shift your perspective. God isn't trying to leave you behind. He's trying to draw you closer. It's easy to misread solitude as abandonment, but I promise you, there's a purpose in the silence. And if you can grasp that purpose, it changes everything. Let's step into that truth and watch how it transforms your life, your relationships, and your sense of self. Growing up, I thought success was all about doing more, gathering more people around you, being the loudest voice in the room. You see, we tend to equate popularity with validation, as though the world's applause can somehow measure our worth. It took me years, a great deal of heartbreak, and many humbling moments before I realized God's measuring stick is different from ours. His plan often involves pulling us away from distractions and empty praises so we can hear his voice clearly. When that happens, my friends, everything else pales in comparison. You realize just how superficial the noise can be when you've experienced the profound depth of divine communion in that alone time. That's what this journey is all about. So let's get into it. My prayer for you is that you leave here with your faith strengthened and your resolve unshakable, knowing that sometimes the single best thing that can ever happen to you is being set apart for a moment. Set apart so that the real miracle can begin. I remember my mother telling me back when I was just a boy, some of the loudest voices in your life will be the biggest distractions from what God is whispering to your heart. Those words came to me years later when I was in that crowded street, feeling alone, feeling scared, and feeling uncertain of who I was destined to be. But in that moment, I recalled her voice, almost like she was right there next to me, saying, "Listen to God. Tune out the noise." That's when I started praying more earnestly. Is when I began journaling my fears and my dreams, trusting that somehow God was shaping me through the emptiness I felt. It was transformative. And if it worked for me, it can work for you. That's why we're here talking about it. Because loneliness doesn't have to be your foe. It can be your greatest ally. If you let it drive you closer to God, closer to the core of who you really are. Let's walk that path together now. Let's discover the deeper reasons for solitude, the lessons we can take from it, and the blessings that await on the other side. I assure you, it's worth every step, every tear, and every late night spent wondering if you're all alone. You're not alone. God is with you. Let's see why that matters more than any crowd ever could. Now, the first thing I want to lay on your heart is this. Solitude reveals who you truly are. It's that powerful moment when you can't rely on a cheering crowd, on 1,000 Instagram likes, or on people telling you who they think you should be. That noise drops away and it's just you, your God, and your raw, unedited self. Let's talk about how that sets you free. Because trust me, when you discover who you really are in those quiet moments, you become unstoppable in the hands of a God who knows exactly why he made you. When that happens, watch out, world. You're stepping into your destiny. I know you're ready. Let's get into it with all our hearts. Let's explore why God calls you to be alone before he blesses you, and how that solitude, uncomfortable as it might be, becomes the launching pad for a new chapter in your life that's better, richer, and more purposeful than anything you could have scripted on your own. Here we go. Let me start by reiterating, this quiet season may be the most precious gift God ever gives you. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's also an invitation to soar beyond your limitations. So hold on to that hope. Know that you're standing on holy ground even in your solitude. Are you ready to unlock its potential? Let's do it, my friends. Because when we're finished here, I believe you'll carry a new light in your eyes. An understanding that solitude was never meant to break you, but to build you. I'm right here with you. Let's begin. Now, I want you to picture something. Picture yourself waking up early in the morning. The sun's just rising and there's a quiet stillness in your home. No one else is awake. It's just you and that gentle hush before the day's hustle begins. In that space, you have a choice. Reach for your phone, check social media, answer emails, or pause. But in that choice, in that small solitary moment, you set the tone for your entire day. That's solitude on a micro level, and it can reshape your perspective if you let it. If such a small practice can shift your day, imagine what a season of solitude can do for your life. This is the foundation we're building from. Let's deepen that foundation now. Because when God calls you to be alone, He's calling you to clear away the clutter, step into His presence, and prepare for a blessing that can't be rushed. There's power in that stillness. And that power is available to each one of us if we yield to it. So, let's keep our minds and our hearts open. I believe something life-changing is about to happen. Let me share with you 3 reasons, 3 key insights why solitude is so vital before that blessing arrives. The first reason is this: in solitude, God refines your character. Think of a goldsmith heating gold until impurities rise to the surface. That process can't happen in chaos. It requires precision, focus, and time away from other distractions. The second reason, in solitude, you learn to hear God's voice. I mean, truly hear it, beyond the slogans, beyond the surface level spirituality, deep into the marrow of your soul. The third reason, in solitude, you learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, forging a faith that isn't dependent on external support. Because let's face it, when you receive the blessing, you'll need the strength and maturity to handle it with integrity. And that's something you learn when you're alone with God, trusting Him every step of the way. It's easy to talk about these reasons, but living them out is a different story. I faced moments where I questioned if the loneliness would ever end. But it does. And when you emerge, you're not the same. You've been refined, realigned, and prepared for what comes next. So let's explore each of these insights one by one, grounding them in real-life experiences. My own, yours, and those we've witnessed in our families, our communities, and the world around us. Because the theory is good, but it's the practice that changes our lives. Let's walk it out together. Keep your heart open, because this is where transformation truly begins. I still remember the time I was involved in a community outreach project in Los Angeles. It was a program designed to mentor young men who felt hopeless, alienated, and alone. We'd have weekly sessions sharing stories, dreams, and struggles. One evening, one of these young men, let's call him Marcus, broke down in tears. He said, "I feel like I'm on an island, man. Nobody gets me. My family doesn't understand why I'm trying to leave the street life behind. My friends think I'm weak for wanting something different, and the people at school, they label me as a lost cause. I'm all alone." The rawness in his voice was palpable. He was young, just out of high school, but the pain in his eyes was far beyond his years. It occurred to me then that Marcus was standing on a precipice. On one hand, he was lonely, feeling cut off from his past circle and not yet accepted by a new one. On the other hand, that same loneliness was a chance to discover a deeper sense of identity. Without the noise of old influences telling him to compromise his dreams, he could finally ask the big questions. Who am I? What am I really supposed to be doing? How can I align my actions with the future I want? That's the refining process in solitude. If he had stayed in the crowd that cheered for the wrong things, that true sense of self might never have emerged. I took him aside and said, "Marcus, I know it hurts. I know you feel abandoned, but this might be the best thing that ever happened to you, because now you can hear your own heartbeat. You can see your own vision. You can listen for God's guidance without the static of negative voices. Let this season shape you." Over time, I watched as he leaned into that solitude, took responsibility for his education, built healthier relationships, and started defining his purpose on his own terms. Today, he's working as a youth counselor, helping kids just like he once was. That's the power of being alone before your blessing. You get recalibrated. You get directed. You get strengthened from the inside out. Maybe some of you are feeling like Marcus. Maybe your old life doesn't fit anymore and you haven't quite found your new place yet. Embrace this season. Don't run from it. Because this is where God refines your character. In that quiet space, you'll face your fears, your doubts, your inadequacies, and in doing so, you'll find a new strength, a new perspective, a new level of faith that can handle the blessing you're about to receive. We live in a culture that avoids discomfort at all costs. We fill every moment with sound, music, social media, television, partly to drown out the emptiness we don't want to confront. But as uncomfortable as it might be, that emptiness is precisely where God's voice often echoes the loudest. In the hush, he reminds you that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that you have a destiny uniquely yours, and that the crowd can't define who you are meant to be. I challenge you to carve out those moments of quiet, even if it's just 15 minutes in the morning, where you set aside distractions and simply wait on God. Let him speak. Let him show you areas of your character that need growth. Let him heal old wounds you've been covering up with busyness or meaningless chatter. Trust me, it's in those moments you begin to realize that solitude isn't a prison sentence. It's a window to your soul. For me, one of the greatest lessons I've learned is that solitude births authenticity. When you're alone, you can't hide behind a role, a reputation, or the expectations of others. You're forced to stand face to face with who you really are. And in that confronting experience, God meets you with grace. He doesn't shame you, he shapes you. He doesn't condemn you, he convicts you in love, showing you a better path. I've felt that shaping power numerous times. It comes as a gentle whisper some days and as a strong wake-up call on others. And each time it leaves me more grounded in who God made me to be, more prepared for whatever blessings or challenges lie ahead. This is why I believe a period of isolation, whether it's a week, a month, or even a year, can be a sacred incubator for your future. Think of it like a hidden garden. No one sees the seeds, but the gardener is at work watering them, nurturing them, pulling out weeds. When the time is right, those seeds burst forth in full bloom. That's exactly how God works in our seasons of solitude. You might not see the growth at first. It may even look barren. But trust that God is cultivating something within you. Your character is deepened, your patience is stretched, and your faith is strengthened. That hidden work is essential so that when God finally says, now is the time, you're ready to flourish in full view. But you can't skip that hidden process. It's foundational. When I was younger, I tried skipping ahead. I chased the spotlight, believing that recognition equaled purpose. But the applause felt empty without the grounding of solitude and personal growth. You know what I mean? That hollowness that creeps in when you realize external success doesn't necessarily translate to internal fulfillment. It wasn't until I took a step back on my knees in prayer, away from the buzz of the world, that I started to see who I was supposed to be in God's eyes, not in people's eyes. And let me tell you something. That revelation changed everything. The second big lesson that emerges when God calls you to be alone is this. You learn to hear his voice above all else. The world is noisy, my friends, very noisy. If you've ever tried to have a meaningful conversation in a crowded restaurant, you know how the clatter of dishes, the music, and other people's chatter make it hard to focus on the person speaking to you. The same goes for your relationship with God. If you're drowning in the world's noise, you might catch hints of God's direction here and there, but you'll miss the deeper, more intimate conversation he wants to have with you. In solitude, however, that background chatter begins to fade, and you start to recognize the gentle yet powerful voice of the Holy Spirit. Let me share a personal reflection. One time I decided to unplug for a few days, no phone, no TV, no outside obligations except my basic responsibilities. I spent that time reading scripture, journaling, and taking long walks. After the initial restlessness wore off, because let's be honest, we're so conditioned to be plugged in, I started to sense a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Ideas flowed. Prayers felt more honest, and I noticed the beauty of small things I'd been rushing past. It was as if God had been whispering all along, but I was finally quiet enough to hear it. That's the kind of clarity we deprive ourselves of when we constantly avoid being alone. This isn't just for pastors or spiritual leaders, it's for everyone. Whether you're a student trying to find your career path, a business owner making tough decisions, or a parent trying to guide your kids in a chaotic world, hearing God's voice can be the difference between aimless wandering and purposeful living. Imagine going into a major decision, like choosing a college, a job, or a life partner, and having that inner conviction that you've heard from God, that you're aligning with His plan. That assurance can't be bought, borrowed, or forced. It's cultivated in the secret place of solitude, where your heart tunes in to divine wisdom. If you're feeling uncertain right now, if there's a storm of confusion swirling around your mind, maybe it's time to step away from the crowd. Take an intentional retreat. Get alone with your thoughts and with God. Ask Him the questions that burn in your heart, and then be still enough to listen for the answers. You might be surprised at how He speaks through Scripture, through a sudden insight, through nature, or even through a memory He brings to mind. The key is to be still. I know it's challenging, especially in a world that equates productivity with constant motion. But sometimes the most productive thing you can do is pause, listen, and let God lead. The third insight I want to share is that solitude teaches you to stand on your own faith. There's a collective strength in community. I celebrate that. We need churches, families, mentors, and friends who uplift us. But there are moments in life when you find that your faith must be personal, tested, and proven in a place where no one else can hold your hand. Those are defining moments. If you rely solely on the faith of your pastor, your parents, or your partner, what happens when they're not there? When God calls you alone, He's inviting you to build a faith foundation that's unshakable, regardless of who's around you. I've had times in my life when I leaned too heavily on others' faith. A friend's confidence in God would strengthen me, or my mother's prayers would cover me. That's beautiful and necessary at times. But I remember the moment I realized my faith had to be my own. It came during a setback, an audition I didn't land that I truly believed was the path God wanted for me. No amount of encouragement could fill the gap if I didn't have a personal conviction that God was still good, still faithful, and still guiding me. So I wrestled with that disappointment in solitude. I poured out my heart to the Lord. Where are you in this? Am I not hearing you correctly? Have I gone astray? Over time, the answers came in the form of peace. Not an immediate open door, but a peace that surpassed my logical understanding of the situation. That peace told me God was indeed still with me. That's when I discovered I had a personal faith, not just borrowed faith from someone else's journey. Perhaps you're at a similar crossroads. Maybe you've always attended church because your family did, or you believe certain things because your social circle expects you to. In your season of solitude, you get to decide for yourself whether this faith is real, whether it's your own. You can't discover that by staying in the safety net of groupthink. You discover it by stepping out on the water alone, trusting that God will sustain you. And believe me, once you experience that personal encounter, your faith becomes like a rock. It might get battered by storms, but it will not break. Now let me bring in another story, this time from a close friend of mine who started a business based on a vision he believed God had given him. In the initial stages, everyone was cheering him on. Friends posted on social media, family members offered to help, and local leaders praised his idea. But when the business hit a financial rough patch, that crowd began to fade. Doubts crept in. He felt betrayed, abandoned, and unsure if he'd misread God's call. Night after night, he wrestled alone, asking God, "Did I misunderstand you? Why am I the only one standing here trying to keep this dream alive? It was through that prolonged season of solitude, of refining, listening, and personal faith that he gained a renewed vision. He scaled back, restructured, and pressed on with a more profound trust in God than he'd ever had before. Eventually, his business turned around. But the real victory wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. He learned that sometimes God strips away the safety of the crowd to show you how strong you can be when you lean on him alone. This might be your story too. It might not be a business, it could be a ministry, a dream, or a personal goal. When the crowd disperses, when the Instagram likes slow down, and when even close friends don't quite get your vision, that might be exactly where God wants you, alone, dependent solely on him. Because in that holy solitude, you solidify your commitment to the calling he's placed on your life. You don't need the echo of others to validate it. You know in your spirit that God planted the seed, and you'll tend to it until it blossoms, even if you have to do it solo for a while. Now, I want to address a common struggle we all face when we're called into solitude: fear. Fear that we'll miss out, fear that people will forget us, fear that we'll become irrelevant, fear that we're making a mistake by choosing the quiet path. Let me reassure you that fear is normal, but it's also an invitation to trust. Look at the life of Jesus himself. He frequently withdrew to solitary places to pray, even when crowds were clamoring for his attention. If even the Son of God needed time away from the noise to commune with the Father, how much more do we need it? Did his solitary moments make him miss out or become irrelevant? Absolutely not. They empowered him for his mission. The same can be true for us. When we follow that example, when we willingly step away from the crowd to meet God in the quiet, he gives us strength, clarity, and direction. That's worth every fear we have to battle. I also want to speak to parents. It can be hard to find solitude when you're juggling kids, work, household duties, and countless demands. But if you don't carve out some alone time with God, you risk parenting from a place of depletion rather than overflow. Even if it's just locking yourself in the bathroom for 5 minutes, I've heard some parents say that's their only refuge. Use that time to breathe, to pray, to recenter. Ask God for wisdom and patience. It might feel small, but those moments add up. Over time, you begin to sense God's presence guiding you, even amidst the chaos of family life. And that's how you maintain a reservoir of love and grace for your children rather than running on empty. In the bigger picture, communities are built by individuals who know who they are and who are guided by God's voice. When we take the time to stand alone, to be refined, and to listen deeply, we bring that wisdom back to our communities. We're able to love more sincerely, serve more selflessly, and lead more effectively because we're not just echoing the noise around us. We're speaking from a place of divine encounter. That's how real change happens. It starts with one person brave enough to say, I will step back, commune with God, and return with a renewed heart. Let's also discuss the challenge of technology in this modern age. We have a habit of seeking constant validation through likes, comments, and shares. It's a chase for affirmation that never really satisfies. That's why it's so vital to log off and tune in to God's frequency. Because if we don't, we'll end up living our lives in the pursuit of digital approval, forgetting that our true worth is anchored in the one who created us. I'm not saying technology is bad, but it's a tool, one that can easily become a distraction if we're not careful. Solitude helps us reset, reminding us that our worth isn't defined by any algorithm. If God has called you to create something, to launch a project, or to share a message, do it from a place of divine conviction, not from a place of people-pleasing. You'll find a depth of satisfaction there that no social media buzz can replicate. Now, as you consider all these stories, all these lessons, ask yourself, where am I resisting solitude? Where am I clinging to the crowd, the noise, and the external validations because I'm afraid to be alone. Once you identify that area, challenge yourself. Are you willing to step into the silence, to sit with your doubts, your dreams, and your God, and let Him work in you? If your answer is yes, buckle up. You're about to embark on a journey that may test your patience and humility, but will undeniably lead you to a blessing shaped precisely for you. It's important to mention that solitude isn't the same as isolation in a harmful sense. We're not talking about cutting yourself off from healthy relationships or refusing support. Rather, we're talking about a spiritual discipline, a mindset shift, and sometimes even a physical retreat that allows you to grow independently of the noise. It's about preparing yourself so that when you do engage with others, you're doing so from a stronger place. You're not seeking their approval. You're sharing your God-given gifts in alignment with His will. That's the difference between healthy solitude and destructive isolation. One is about preparation, the other about running away from reality. We want the former, not the latter. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, I see the value of solitude, but how do I practice it in a practical way? Great question. Here's some actionable steps. First, set a routine for your alone time. It could be early morning or late at night. Start with just 10 or 15 minutes of prayer, reflection, or reading something that nourishes your spirit. Second, periodically schedule longer retreats, a half day or a full day every couple of months, where you unplug from technology and daily tasks to focus on God and personal growth. Third, find a simple practice that helps you stay present, like journaling or walking in nature. As you walk, pray, or simply observe the beauty around you, letting God speak to you through His creation. Over time, these habits strengthen your resilience and tune your spirit to God's guidance. And if you slip up, if you get busy, if you miss a morning, if you find yourself drifting back into constant noise, don't be discouraged. This is a discipline that takes time to develop. Show yourself grace. Pick yourself back up and try again. Remember, every small step toward solitude is a step toward deeper intimacy with God, a chance for Him to refine you and prepare you for your next chapter. Now, let me summarize some core truths we've unpacked. Solitude refines your character like gold in a fire. Solitude helps you hear God's voice above the world's clamor. Solitude teaches you to stand on your own 2 feet of faith rather than relying solely on others. It's the place where you confront your fears, wrestle with your doubts, and discover the depths of your divine identity. And it's a discipline you can cultivate through intentional daily practices, periodic retreats, and a willingness to let go of the world's incessant demands for attention. Ultimately, this is all heading toward one overarching truth. God is preparing you. He's setting the stage for a blessing or a calling that requires maturity, clarity, and unwavering faith. That's why He brings you into a season of solitude. It's not to punish you, it's to elevate you. And when you embrace that perspective, loneliness transforms into a sacred invitation. It becomes a space where God kneads and molds your heart so you can hold the weight of the blessing He's about to pour out. Because blessings aren't just for your benefit, they're for the advancement of God's kingdom and for the encouragement of others. And He needs vessels who won't crumble under pressure. That's you, that's me. That's everyone who's willing to stand alone, listen deeply, and come forth stronger. As you navigate this journey, be mindful that solitude is not a one-time event. Life unfolds in seasons. There may be multiple times God calls you back to that quiet place for a deeper work. Each time you'll find yourself more rooted, more focused, and more in tune with His plan. Don't dread those seasons. Anticipate them. They are the holy ground where true transformation happens. And always remember, you might be alone physically, but spiritually you are never abandoned. God's presence is more real in those private moments than any crowd could ever be. Let me bring in another family example. I have a cousin who struggled for years with feeling like the black sheep of the family. He had creative gifts, that didn't quite align with the family's traditional expectations. Gatherings felt awkward. He tried to conform, and in doing so, he lost the spark that made him who he was. Eventually, he chose to move away, not in anger, but in a pursuit of personal clarity. He spent a year abroad, teaching and discovering new cultures. In that time, he reconnected with himself and with God. He found peace about his calling as an artist, recognized that he didn't need his entire family to validate his gifts, and he discovered that God's plan was bigger than any box people tried to put him in. When he returned, he wasn't seeking approval anymore. He was walking in purpose. That year of solitude changed everything for him. Today, he uses his art to inspire hope in underprivileged communities. His time alone wasn't about running away. It was about running toward God's voice. If he'd stayed just to make everyone else comfortable, he might have spent a lifetime quietly resenting his circumstances. Instead, that solitary season broke the cycle of trying to please others and set him free to live out his God-given gifts. Perhaps you're in a situation where you feel out of place in your current environment. Solitude might be your doorway to rediscovering who you are and what God created you to do. It's not selfish, it's strategic, because once you're clear on your identity and calling, you can serve others far more effectively and with genuine love, not with hidden frustration. This notion applies to business contexts as well. Sometimes entrepreneurs or leaders need to pull back from the daily grind to reassess the vision. If they don't, they run the risk of drifting into mediocrity or losing the core mission amidst constant external pressures. A sabbatical, a retreat, or a season away can reignite passion and creativity, enabling them to lead with fresh fire. So whether it's family, business, or personal growth, solitude is a universal tool in God's toolkit for shaping us into effective vessels for his work. Now, as we move toward the final stretch of our time together, let's tie this all together. You might be thinking, how do I know if God is calling me to be alone before he blesses me? One sign is that doors to certain relationships, opportunities, or environments start closing, often in a way that feels beyond your control. Another sign is a persistent restlessness in your spirit, a sense that you need to step back and reevaluate. And yet another sign is a growing desire for depth. Depth in your faith, depth in your purpose, and depth in your relationships. If you recognize any of these signs, consider that God might be nudging you to enter a season of solitude. The question isn't whether it will be easy. The question is whether it will be worth it. And I can confidently say it will be. Friends, this is your moment. Maybe you're hearing this because God himself is confirming what you've suspected all along. You need some quiet, some space, some time to recalibrate. Don't ignore that still small voice. Your next season, your next level of impact, and your deeper relationship with God may hinge on your willingness to enter the sacred chamber of solitude. And remember, you're not missing out on life by doing this. You're preparing to live it more fully with clear direction and unshakable purpose. Now let's make it personal now. I want you to think of one specific area in your life where you feel stuck or overwhelmed. It could be a relationship that's draining you, a job that's unfulfilling, or a dream that's been on hold for too long. Ask yourself, have I spent enough solitary time seeking God's perspective on this issue? Or have I been drowning in advice, opinions, and noise from the outside world? If your answer is the latter, I invite you to commit to a new practice. Carve out consistent alone time in the coming days to pray, reflect, and listen. Write down what you sense God is speaking to your heart. Don't filter it. Don't rationalize it. Just let it flow. Let that be the start of a transformative dialogue between you and your Creator. This simple exercise can catalyze change you never thought possible. And yes, you might cry, you might feel uncomfortable, you might want to give up. That's part of the process. Growth isn't always neat or painless, but it's meaningful. And when you emerge, you'll carry a testimony that can inspire others walking the same road. Because this isn't just about you. It's about the people who will see your journey and realize they too can embrace solitude for the sake of God's blessing and purpose. Let me remind you of Marcus, of my business friend, of my cousin, and of the countless others who found their wings in that lonely cocoon. They all came out stronger, more focused, and more aligned with God's blueprint for their lives. It's available to all of us. God doesn't have favorites. He has a plan for each one of us. The only question is whether we'll trust him enough to step away from the noise and into the quiet confidence of his presence. So here's where we land. Solitude is not a punishment, it's a preparation. It's not a rejection, it's a redirection. It's not a dead end, it's a reset. God calls you to be alone before he blesses you because he wants you whole, he wants you aware of your purpose, and he wants you standing on a foundation that no storm can shake. That's the essence of it all. When the world says, you're alone, you've been left behind, God says, I've set you apart. Watch what I do next. Now, I want you to take a moment to breathe in that truth. Let it sink in that your loneliness might be the labor pains before your new birth, your new level, your new blessing. Let that reframe how you see your current circumstances. Let it ignite hope where doubt once lingered. And let it propel you forward with a determined spirit, because this is the turning point. A chance to step from sorrow into significance, from emptiness into expectancy. You've heard the stories, you've felt the tug on your heart, and you've seen how solitude can shape and transform now. It's time to decide, will you lean into it or resist it? Will you trust God's refining process, or will you cling to the crowd's shallow affirmation? I know which path leads to authentic growth. I know which path yields blessings that run deep. So I encourage you, with all the passion in my heart, step into that solitude and find what God has waiting for you. You're not alone. He's with you, guiding each step and preparing you for something beyond your wildest dreams. Believe it. Embrace it. Live it. So here we are, my friends, at the point of decision. We've traversed the emotional terrain of loneliness, the lessons hidden there, and the promise of a blessing on the horizon. Let's recap with fresh eyes. God calls you away to refine your character. He wants that pure gold shining from within you, free of the impurities that crowd life can perpetuate. He calls you away so you can truly hear his voice. That gentle yet firm guidance that can set your course straight when the world would have you zigzagging from one trend to another. And finally, he calls you away so you can stand on your own faith, unshakable, unwavering, a rock that weathering storms will not break. Do you see the journey we've been on together? We started with that poignant question, why does God want me to be alone? And we unraveled it step by step. We saw through personal stories, mine, Marcus's, my cousins, my friends, how solitude can be a crucible, burning off what no longer serves you, forging something far more resilient. We've laughed at the irony of it. We've shed tears at the pain of feeling forgotten. And we've smiled at the beautiful way God brings us full circle. We've recognized that sometimes losing the crowd is the only way to find God. And that, my friends, is a treasure no human praise can match. You see, what God is calling you to requires depth. Surface level faith won't cut it. Half-hearted commitment won't sustain you. You need that rich, robust, tested, and proven kind of faith that only solitude can refine. This is what transforms you from a spectator into a true participant in the kingdom's work. It's what fuels you to love with a compassion that's real, to serve with a dedication that's unwavering, and to lead with integrity that won't bow to temptation. That's the fruit of walking through the valley of loneliness into the mountaintop of blessing. So let me ask you, are you ready to apply this? Are you willing to take that first step into the unknown, trusting that God's hand is guiding you every inch of the way? Because that's what it means to say yes to solitude. It means silencing your phone when the urge to scroll hits hard. It means pausing to pray when anxiety tries to creep in. It means believing that there's more to life than what you see, and that the quiet path might be the straightest route to your destiny. If you've been waiting for a sign, let this be it. God is telling you, step away, come to me, let me shape you. Your role is simply to obey. I want to challenge you to a call to action. Make a plan for solitude. Don't just think about it, commit to it. If you're someone who thrives on structure, schedule it in your calendar. If your life is more fluid, find a quiet corner of your day or week and make it sacred. Write down your thoughts, questions, and doubts. Offer them to God. Then listen. Open your Bible, pray, or simply sit in silence. Let your soul catch up with your body. This is not a one-time event. It's a lifestyle shift. And when you do this consistently, I promise you'll see the difference. Your discernment will sharpen, your stress will lessen, and your sense of direction will crystallize. As you do, expect resistance, not just from external demands, but from within. There will be moments you feel restless, unsure, or even bored. Push through that. On the other side of that discomfort lies revelation. This is your spiritual workout. It requires discipline, but the gains are immeasurable. You'll develop spiritual muscles that allow you to carry the blessing God has prepared for you. Blessings that may be bigger than anything you've carried before. And when those blessings flow, they won't crush you. You'll be ready because you allowed solitude to fortify you from the inside out. One last thing, as you grow, share your testimony. Don't keep the power of solitude locked away as a secret. Tell someone about what God is doing in your quiet time. Encourage them to embark on a similar journey. We're not called to a permanent isolation from community. We're called to be refilled and renewed so that we can pour back into the lives around us. Your story could be the spark that ignites someone else's transformation. That's the beauty of God's plan. We're all interconnected, even in our moments of solitude. And so as we wrap up this incredible time together, let the final note in your heart be one of hope and anticipation. You're stepping into a new understanding, a new way of seeing your lonely seasons, and a new willingness to let God work in the private places of your life. You're realizing that what might feel like an empty wilderness is actually holy ground where God meets you in the hush. That's a place of revelation, of healing, and a profound love. Let that love strengthen your faith. Let it calm your fears, and let it propel you toward the blessing that's around the corner. I stand here humbled by how God has used the solitary moments in my own life to shape me into who I am today. And I'm confident He'll do the same for you. Every setback, every heartbreak, every bout of loneliness, if surrendered to Him, becomes a stepping stone on the path to your destiny. Don't let the enemy fool you into thinking you're forgotten or unworthy. You are a child of God, designed for a purpose, and that purpose is being refined in the kiln of solitude. When the time is right, you'll emerge shining like never before, ready to bless others and glorify God with the gifts and insights you've gained. So take this message, hold it close, and let it resonate in the days to come. The next time you feel lonely, remember God is calling you closer. The next time you fear being left out, remember God might be positioning you to stand out in ways you never dreamed. The next time you wonder if your solitary season has any meaning, remember this is where your character forms, your ears tune to God's voice, and your personal faith takes root in something unbreakable. I leave you with this final encouragement. Don't run from solitude, run to it. Meet God there. Bring your pain, your questions, your hopes, your tears, and lay them at His feet. Let Him transform your loneliness into a divine encounter that changes the course of your life. Believe that He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. And when you see that blessing unfold, when you feel the surge of fulfillment that only God can give, you'll know why He first called you to be alone. You'll see that He was never denying you. He was equipping you for more than you could handle without Him. May you walk in that truth today, tomorrow, and all the days of your life. May your solitude become your sanctuary, and may your sanctuary prepare you for a blessing that overflows into every corner of your existence. Stand strong, stand faithful, and stand expectant. Your season of solitude is ushering in the dawn of your greatest chapter yet. Let it be so in Jesus' name. Thank you for sharing this time with me, for opening your hearts, and for bravely confronting what it means to be called to solitude before the blessing. I pray you leave here not just informed, but transformed, carrying a spark that will light your path in the days ahead. Remember, you are not truly alone. God is with you in every moment, lovingly guiding you toward the blessing that's been prepared just for you. Embrace that reality. Step forward in faith and watch how your life unfolds in ways you never imagined possible. Go forth, my friends, and be blessed. You have everything you need to take that journey from loneliness to love, from isolation to impact, and from silence to a song that only you can sing.